Hi, you are in for a special show today. Stay tuned, okay?
Great.
Voices of humanity, we need to hear your voices. We need to hear your voices.
A warm welcome to Voices of Humanity at prconnectionsradio.com, the voice of new media. I'm your host, Sandra McKechnie. It's great to be here another Friday with you. We have an amazing guest for you. As you know, this video podcast is fueled by double consciousness. Double consciousness has to do with two streams of thought, two social identities, and it has very much to do with the people that have gone through the trans-Saharan trade, apartheid, colonizational imperialism, and so on, and how they show up in the 21st century. And we're going to delve into some of that. I'm going to read this amazing lady's her bio. Welcome, Fenella. Yay!
Hi.
How you doing? We've had some special times meeting together.
Great. Yeah.
We
Looking
have.
forward to it.
Yes, this is going to be good. We've met before and we've kind of mulled over some of this, and we're just going to give you some real content here today that is really a learning opportunity for all of us. It really will be. Fenella Trevillion. Fenella is an executive and career coach. Fenella brings a racial justice stance to all her work. It is reinforced by a commitment to anti-oppression, social and climate justice. Fenella's work is influenced by systemic mindfulness and somatic coaching. There's a lot here, and I'm just going to cover some points. I'm chewing my tongue here as I talk. Her knowledge base and skill has been informed by a master's in public services management, and more recently, her master's in coaching and behavioral change. She currently coaches clinicians, executives, care staff, and managers at all levels in organizations, and is a coach supervisor for her coaching associates. Added to this, she has recently co-developed and co-facilitated a series of workshops on working with difference, exploring race. This is alongside co-facilitating a group exploring white privilege through using a mindfulness framework. This is amazing. All right. During the lockdowns in 2021, she and her partner developed a workshop using mindfulness, movement, and coaching to provide a generative space for the participants to explore uncomfortable issues. This is currently being further developed to use in their work on climate justice. Fenella's early life was spent in South Africa. This was a formative experience. It provided the basis of her racial, social, and climate justice values and includes a commitment to understanding and the dynamics of power, equity, and diversity. Her further and higher education took place in the UK. She lives with her partner and has 2 adult children, loves learning, reading, yoga, and cycling. That is Fenella. That's a bit anyway about Fenella. Wow. Would you like to tell our listeners just a little bit more about where you're at now?
Wow. Yeah. So I'm busy doing really a combination of coaching. And when I said clinicians, it's predominantly doctors who are in training. And then I do supervision. So I'm running some supervision groups. That's one particular one is supervising people who are themselves coaching in a large organization, and various other kind of different coaching-y training and supervision things. That's alongside my other things like cycling, a bit of kayaking, not right now, though. It's a bit cold for that.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so we're going to get down to the meat and potatoes. Or the ackee and saltfish, curry goat, stew peas. But we're going to talk a little bit about growing up in South Africa apartheid. and I would just wanted to know, because we're going to tell you some stories. I have my stories in terms of how anti-bias, anti-oppressive lens that I look through and I coach through, and what happened to me that I happened to, as we say, I woke up. What did that look like? In terms of that dissonance and that sort of that discomfort in the mind, and what came to me, in other words, what was I filing in my filing system cognitively for a lot of years. So we're going to share a few stories, Fenella and I. But I wanted to just let our viewers know what that looked like growing up.
So quite something in many ways. I grew up from the other side of what your experience was, of course. So there I was, a white person with white privilege in a domain of white supremacy, which was actually embedded in the law. And that's a very significant thing, and that's what apartheid was. It was embedded in the law. So there's obviously white supremacy in many other places, but the fact that it was embedded in law was really huge. So what I saw was kind of that law kind of everywhere. So the sense of the state was really huge. And so whatever you saw, so whenever you saw the police, it was something to be frightened of, really scared of. And the kinds of things that I quite often saw were particularly Black people being kind of in not a very pleasant way, being shoveled into the back of vans. Often because they didn't have what's called a pass with them. So every single Black person had to carry a pass. If you're white, you didn't have to do that. And so that, that sense of violence everywhere. So on a systemic level, on an interpersonal level, I told you a story about what it was like to just wherever you were, kind of silly thing, like when I was 8, I remember walking into a shop which was very busy. It was about 30 people on one side, and they were all Black. And on the other side, there was 1 or 2 people who were white. And immediately, the shopkeeper just turned to me to serve me. There I was, 8. And that's I just deeply remember that sort of that feeling of embarrassment, really. And then one saw a lot of sense of violence. I saw it everywhere. It was just it was commonplace to see violence in one way or another, white people against Black, and mostly the police, really. The other thing that I wanted to say was actually there was a sense of in interpersonal relationships. I mean, a lot of people say to me, "Oh, you're terribly political." And actually I am, because as soon as you walked in the room, you knew what everybody's politics was. And you had to be really careful navigating that, and in terms of raising the conflict. And that was just not easy. So, just one of those things you grew up checking for all the time.
Wow.
And
so did you actually experience the protests and the loss of lives? Because there was quite a lot of that.
Indeed, there was. Yes. So I wasn't at Sharpeville, but I remember, the kind of the incredible shock. I remember reading about it and that complete sort of overwhelm.
Yes.
And of course, you see, we weren't allowed. I mean, protests were something that were illegal again. And so people did it often in a spontaneous way. I was at one protest as well, that what we did was we protested from just inside the university, because it was 10 years since Black people were not allowed to go to the university in Johannesburg, which is where I grew up.
And you were sorry, I was going to ask you, and you were for the cause.
Oh, of course, of course. And the police would just come and agitate, and just every so often drop kind of those kind of smoke bombs of one sort or another, or it was just very difficult, and they created an atmosphere of fear and violence, and that was always around.
Wow.
So it's just something you kind of grew up with. So it was the sense of, as you grow up, you want a sense of trust, of safety. And it was only like that once you were kind of in your own home. Or I was lucky enough to have my grandparents who lived on a farm. And actually that was lovely, because we quite often would have Black people and their families visiting, and that was a place of safety for them and for us too. So that had a different feel to it.
So
I don't know, has that helped you at all?
No, it does. When you think of safety, though, in terms of were you afraid of the protesting? What was that happening? Like, you're young, right? So how did you feel, like, really?
Well, I remember feeling terribly frightened because, part of the issue is, I mean, let's face it, the experience of Black people, their own personal experience, and a white person is completely different.
Yes.
But once you were part of the cause, you knew that there was you just didn't know what would happen to you once you got picked up by the police, and people would just disappear. And certainly Black people did just supposedly disappear. Nobody knew, what happened to them. And so that does give you are living in a climate of fear. And I was on, in a slightly safer place, being a white person. But once you were seen to be part of the cause and against the government, that was very difficult. So.
Now, were you afraid of the Black people? Were you afraid of the protesting, the whole thing? What would that look like?
Well, actually, I wasn't afraid of Black people. One of the things that I think is an important bit in this whole story is actually at a personal and emotional level. I was like many other white people, if not all, I grew up with a Black carer who gave me a lot of my care, much more than my mother ever did. So there was a kind of curious intimacy there. When I was upset and scared about things, I would go to her. So, I've grown up in this way of feeling that sense, and it's of safety.
Is that like a nanny or?
Yeah.
Okay.
And,
I know.
It's kind of typical white story.
That's a mammy. You had a mammy. I'm just. I can say this to Fenella. So wow. So when did you ever have any? Well, I don't. That wouldn't have been permitted. Did you have a relationship in any way with any of the Blacks that were protesting? Did you have any?
When I didn't personally, but actually, when I was at school, it was quite interesting. I remember my earlier days. Of course, there was all the difficult feelings around, and I think quite a few people sort of were pro the government. But of course, you were very careful, again, as I said. But interestingly enough, I remember in my last year of school when people's guards went down, I remember a couple of quite close friends admitted that they were having relationships with Black people, which was utterly illegal, as you can imagine. A very, very dangerous thing to do. And you'd get followed. And I do remember it very powerful, her talking about holding hands with this Black guy, and that combination of Black and, different skin colors.
Yes.
And both of them looking at that and saying, I can't believe that this is illegal. Just having two different skin colors there in a hand.
Right.
So that was very powerful for me, really.
And of course, we know it didn't start at about color. That was constructed so that we would have all of this mess between us. It had to do with nations, but it didn't have to do with skin color, because apparently way before it was 1685, back in the day, people were able to be with who they wanted to be with.
Indeed.
But I always say somebody was with a cauldron in the kitchen stirring up.
Yes, that's a perfect way to put it. Yeah.
Stirring up some evils. I am fascinated by that story. And I'm going to pop one in for myself now. Years ago, we're talking about stories that happen to us that give us a discomfort in the mind. And for people that went across the trade, even in apartheid, even, individuals that Africans, everybody that came across the trade, whether it's imperialism and so on, we have stories that we're almost taught, shh, don't talk about it. Meritocracy, pull up yourself by your bootstraps already. Well, when I started to close that disconnect, how many years ago, 5 years ago, when I met W.E.B. Du Bois. I didn't meet him personally, of course. He's gone.
Indeed.
And another lady called Dr. Joy DeGruy. She's out there doing her work, and there's a video. I always push it. I don't even know the lady. I never met her personally, but her work is amazing. Dr. Joy DeGruy, post-traumatic slave syndrome. It's a video. It's still out there. It's about an hour and 20 minutes and change. Amazing. So anyway,
and I watched it. I would
did
like
you?
to do
How
it,
was
and
it?
it's fantastic. Really, really.
Is it not?
Brilliant.
Every training I do, and I'm doing a few coming up, and I ask people to watch that just to set the pace, just to set the pace first, right? But it's an amazing watch. So one day, I don't know if you guys remember this movie years ago, this movie Ghost, and I was watching it with a friend of mine. It was with Demi Moore, Whoopi Goldberg, and I forget the other gentleman's name. Anyway, Patrick Swayze.
Oh, yeah.
And he died, and apparently, he was gone. And the Whoopi Goldberg, she was like playing where he died anyway, and his entity kind of went through Whoopi Goldberg to connect with his wife. And there was a scene where Whoopi's a dark-skinned Black woman, and she's, she's just being sensitive to her because it's supposed to be the husband. It's one of those movies. So it's supposed to be the husband just comforting her, because he's in Whoopi Goldberg's character, and he's comforting his wife. So there was a scene where you have the two hands on each other, and I was breaking bread and enjoying my time with a friend of mine. This happens to be a white gentleman, and he saw the scene came on, and he went, "I hate that." And I'm watching because I know this person forever. We're very close. And he said, "I hate that." And then he said it again, and he said, "I hate that." I said, "What?" And he said, "The white hand, the black hand on the white hand." I never forgot it. If he's out there and watching this, you can get in touch with me. We can chat. Yeah. But that scene, I didn't know what to do with myself. Their talk about discomfort, I didn't know what to do with it. I tried to pretend to be mad, but there was some real trauma being digged up on the inside of me. He hated the scene with the black hand on the white hand like this, doing this. It was visceral. He hated it. And those sort of things we filed, because I filed it, because I hadn't yet come to the awareness that I'm at now, closing that disconnect. And people think, if you don't talk about it, that it's not going to bother you. Well, it's like saying, what you don't know doesn't hurt you. Inevitably it does. And I've seen it over and over again in our trainings. But that story left me thinking that there was, again, there's that internal oppressed self. There's something wrong with me. Why would he say that? And then again, another friend said, another instance, someone said to me, "If you washed all the black people, you washed them all, and you put them in front of me," he said, "I could still smell that they were black." You can't make this stuff up. I'm telling you, it happened in my life. And in these trainings, Fenella, we have story after story. That's why I'm working on this thing. It's taken me a long time. This ebook called "Is There Something on My Face?" Because I told you the story about that.
Yeah.
Now, is there anything, when you're looking through, is there another story you have when you're looking through your eyes as a so-called white, growing up in South Africa? What else did you see that left you feeling discomfort?
One of the things, it was more about what I read. So when I was really quite young, I'm thinking back, we always had a newspaper in the house. And I remember, I think I was, again, really quite young, like sort of 7 or 8, reading about hanging figures. Goodness knows why, but I found myself thinking, God, this is quite a thing. So how many people had been hanged that year? And it was something like 350 black people and 2 white people. And I know that I know that that's about somebody else's experience, but I remember having a kind of visceral feeling, because I didn't believe in hanging anyway. But that thought of it, that was really a very first really powerful thing, me realizing that was what kind of systemic racism was all about, really. How is it that happened? And of course, there were loads of other little things that I remember,
Yeah.
but that was quite a visceral one, and I shall never forget it, actually.
What did the seeing the violence like? Are you literally seeing people hurt and abused, blacks that are, in these protests? What did you
Yes,
see?
well, often I'm not even talking about protests here.
Uh-huh.
So of an ordinary day, you might be walking down the street,
Okay.
and particularly in town, this has often happened in town, and you might see 3 or 4 black people being pushed about and poked, perhaps with guns,
Mm.
by the police,
Mhm.
and you're reasonably sure that almost they probably hadn't done anything, because you'd seen
Mhm.
the scene so many times before, and they were just
Yes.
immediately shoveled kind of with guns into the back of the car. I mean, into the back of these police vans.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
that, so it wasn't even at a protest. This was kind of normal day-to-day stuff that you would see. And I've
And
talked with other friends of mine, and they remember that viscerally too.
was there greater violence? Did you see beatings or anything like that?
Oh, yes, yes. Oh, yes. I certainly
Mm.
had another occasion. I remember absolutely a guy who was, behaving perfectly gently, very politely to the police. And before I knew he was being beaten up. Yeah, that was not uncommon.
So let's talk about your work, because I remembered meeting you in that little capsule. We
Yeah.
got together with a group of coaches. I had sort of challenged one of the coaches, and she invited me. I challenged them because I wanted to, as coaches, I wanted to really challenge how coaches, and I didn't know there was other coaches that are really looking at this. What lens are we looking through when we look at blacks, and when we look at our indigenous brothers and sisters, especially, but any group, Latinx or Muslims? How are we approaching people without, you don't even, and we talked about this, you don't have to necessarily do it through words or language. It's how that we're spiritual beings. How are you acknowledging that individual? I think of blacks that went through so much, and built up some of the Americas. Hello, they built, and many other places too. But there were the stocks and bonds, the Wall Street, if you will.
Mm.
So how did that look for people? And I was saying in the capsule that you don't have to have a degree in history, just some basic knowledge as to how our indigenous brothers and sisters that fight their plight, what's happening there, our Muslims, what's happening in Latin America, what's going on, and how they see themselves in terms of heritage and ethnicity. So and Fenella did something that I thought, wow, she's interesting. And I wanted to connect with her. And so we did. But she started to talk about, I'm going to paraphrase it, but she was saying that she sort of was giving it off like she doesn't want to just come and sit and discuss another discussion, but she kind of wanted to roll up the sleeves. What are we doing? Like, what exactly are we doing about this imbalance of power? Did you want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that the thing that completely shook me when I was doing my coaching masters. I mean, it was a wonderful course in masses of ways. It was very experiential. But this whole issue of color blindness was apparent everywhere. And in fact, we did have 2 people on our course from Africa. And I cannot recall anybody saying anything about difference. And how was that? How did they experience that? And there was no conversation at all. I think things are different now, but it wasn't that long ago, 3, 4 years ago that I finished. And I think for me, the whole idea of the color blindness, and also this idea of everybody's equal. So in fact, I was just remembering the other day that I was in a big group of people, and there was this quite well-known coach. Lots of people know him. He's done lots and lots of work with big organizations. And I was quite concerned about a couple of things that he said that left me feeling disturbed, because I thought I could sense a sort of color blindness and a blindness to any kind of difference, to be honest. So,
Okay.
any intersectional difference of any sort. And so I asked to meet him, and I spoke to him, and I just tried to draw it out generally. And he just went on and on saying, I treat everybody equally. I treat everybody the same.
Uh-huh.
And I think that really brought it home to me, because actually as coaches, even though we have this idea of being unconditional positive regard, which is that Rogerian phrase that we all have, that can slide into being we treat everybody the same. And one of a key issue for coaches is being very present with people and being present with everything that they're showing up with. And I think our part of how you see somebody showing up is everything you see about them, you hear about them, you use every sense. And if you can't see difference, or if you can't admit it, because once admitting it introduces some very, very difficult things into the room. Well, it's not difficult. I don't find it very difficult, but people are find it very hard to talk about difference, and particularly if we're talking about skin color. And I think it's Layla Saad said, what insult it is, this color blindness, because it's an erasure. So it erases all sorts of significant, important things about that person. And, there's that bit of me thinking that is, surely that's not good coaching, because what you should be doing is taking on board all the data you have in front of you and finding a way to navigate in the most easy way possible, to navigate those differences, to understand them, to share them, and understand what their meaning is. Because coaching is all about working with meaning, isn't it? And
Absolutely.
somebody's sense of belonging. And if you don't get that onto the table, then I think, as you can hear, I'm a little bit critical about what sort of coaching is that then. Anyway, does that answer your question a bit?
It does. I'm going to just ask you a question. Now, in your, we were going to make this a little spicy and prickly, but in your feelings, when we're talking about dissonance, how do you see, I know we're all pushing back against a lot of multi-generational stuff that was passed to us in terms of bias. And when you look at Blacks, how do you see them?
Black people.
Yes, Black people.
Well, I must admit, I'm feeling quite a sense of release, actually, because I think a while ago, and certainly certainly before George Floyd was murdered, that was a real turning point for me, because it was a real aha moment, because I suddenly realized I had a sense of relief and release and energy, because I could be speaking to people as people rather than kind of being caught up in that whole discourse of I'm a Black person, you're a white person, and all the issues that arise out of that. And actually, if you ask, how do I see a Black person, like obviously I see yourself, I notice that difference, and that's all there is. And what that raises for me is something kind of interesting and curious, just about lots of things, people's background, people's heritage, and as a human being, because I think that's the absolute key issue about this, is that we're all human beings, and what we need to do is think about what's our common ground and the excitement of what's the difference.
I heard someone the other day talking about sometimes they need a white out, and that literally means, because of the internalized self, the work that I do, and I support people in the areas of social justice, and Fenella, some of the things I experience, vicariously, it can make you angry. You have to sometimes I go right now, thank goodness for coaching, and I coach it out with my coach. I will not be without a coach myself. And so my thing is, and I heard this person saying, because of all that they go through as a Black person, they literally sometimes need a white out, you know. And as much as I have my sister girls that are white, lovely ladies I've known for over 20 something years. But sometimes I need one myself because the work is so dense, and it really affects you. Right. So when I'm thinking of you, have you had what our viewers would love to know, I'm sure, I'm pretty positive, in terms of discrimination? Have you been on the other side of that? You've seen it? How have you felt? Have you been delivering discrimination? Have you had that experience in your own life?
Yeah. Yes, and I mean, it's interesting, this whiteout. I'm not sure if I really understand it, but
it's when it's too much, in terms of when we feel what overly there's an oppressive experience that you keep having. It's the micros and the macros, if you will, and you feel you need. I don't see no white people today. Okay, you know what I mean? Yeah. It can be like that. That's genuine, especially, and a lot of people may not feel that way if their hands aren't in the work. It can be like that, and that's a genuine feeling. The same way I would, when someone came on my call the other day and they said, "Oh, well, I was so offended when you say that about implicit bias. I don't have any biases." And I'm looking at this person, and I'm trying to just calm myself and go back to no bias 101, and just, try and speak to this one, because they were really offended that I suggested such a thing. Yeah. I have no biases at all. And I thought, wow, as you come through a womb, if it's via a petri dish, whatever, we have biases. And I had to go back to just the elementary stage there to do that. But there is, because what we don't know can inevitably hurt us. Right? Because in the corporate world, there's so much of this bias. Like, everybody should get a cultural audit of some sort, because people aren't really aware that they're treating people a certain way, So that's why I was saying to you, are you able to recognize in your own life that, have you looked at your own life that way, had that awareness?
Yes, absolutely. And I think, it's interesting you talk about corporate, actually, because I was with a group of people the other day. They were kind of half the people were Black, that were there, and all coaches, and their experience in corporate world, and the kind of nodding to and of course they always called it inclusion and diversity, which troubles me, actually, because that only deals with things in a passive way, because I think we also need to look and understand what the power dynamics are there. Yes, but still, I suppose, at least if it begins to get the debate onto the table, I think that's a good thing. And
for sure.
Yeah. And I was so interested, actually, at the experiences, particularly that these Black people had were horrendous. But the thing that mostly interested me was I realized how angry I was, and I kept on thinking, what's that about? And I think there must have been some, because they were so gentle and so compassionate and so polite about it, and I was wondering whether I was the person holding the anger, as I couldn't. I could hardly contain myself, because I wanted to talk about, actually, white, this is not going to change until white people start absolutely throwing up the mirror in front of us. And if I am, the one thing that I have found useful is with working with another group, with a group of white people, and examining our racism and examining our behavior. And that in itself was quite useful, actually. But you are right. There's that sense of feeling overwhelmed, really. But that's, anyway, I don't know.
No.
Yeah.
Wow. I was thinking, there was a few things I'm thinking.
Yeah.
When you're thinking, when I was on a show the other day, a wonderful lady, she interviewed me, and we were talking about, because I do this little hour training called Policing Implicit Racial Bias. And we got to her, and we just got on a conversation on her show. And we started to talk about how we see things, right? How our parents and so on. And she said, I said to my mom once, I asked my mom, and she's going to come on this show, I just loved her. She just laid it out. She says, I asked my mom, what would she do if I married a black man?
Mm-hmm.
And she said, her mom paused and she started to think, and she went, well, and then she said, oh, and she used her name. Say her name's Lucy. Lucy, I would just die. I really would just die, Lucy. And she was so, like, she was on point. I could almost see her mother. But what that triggered for me as I am doing these learnings is, listen, do you know why? See, there's a backstory to that. Why would your mother just die? We can make our own choices. You can decide who you want to marry out here, right?
Mm-mm.
That's not the thing. But why would she just die? Right? So sometimes what we're experiencing today, so somebody that just saw that didn't have any point of reference, this is what we do in our trainings, to say to people, don't get mad, because you'd be just like, you know, so-and-so, why would you just die? Why would you say that? You're prejudiced, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-mm.
There's a historical issue there, right? There's something for us to look at so we can close that, get rid of some of that anger, and start to do something about where we are. And one of those, in 1995, there was this amazing phrase, super predator. And it was perpetuated. It was under the Clinton administration, and it whipped up a lot of support for him. There was a professor that wrote this article on called the super predator thing. Mm-hmm. And as you know, a super predator, I mean, a lion, a hawk, out to destroy and their prey. So he predicted in this article that tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of these super predators, and who were super predators? Blacks, Indigenous, Latinx. These were the super predators, especially Blacks. Wow. So now his prediction failed. Mm-hmm. All right. He was from Princeton U. His prediction failed, and he apologized. There's a video out there of him apologizing. But I put forward, Fenella, that the poison's already in the cookie. It didn't work. It wasn't right. It wasn't true. But these super predators, that whole theory, that's already out there, right? As to how people subliminally look at a Black man. And so that never goes away. And every time, you mentioned before that the law afforded you rights. The law does not afford in apartheid, in the uprisings, via slavery, the law does not afford us that right. The law affords us violence. Mm. So we don't get that privilege, So this is where, and again, there's another film. I was sharing it with this woman on the show as to why her mom would say, I would just die if you married a Black man, and where it comes from. It was right in the core of who she was. So if she had gone and tapped into that somehow in terms of her cognitive dissonance and what that looked like for her, she would have found, like in our trainings, a number of white people come through and go, oh my gosh, because the awakening comes, that powerful dawning comes, where they're like, and the first thing they feel is guilt. That's a whole other thing. But it's a wonderful experience as we move on. But there's this whole film out here. It's called Birth of a Nation. Early 1900s, right? And Birth of a Nation. In Birth of a Nation, it's a silent film, of course. And in this thing, there are these Black men in this film. Of course, it's white men in blackface because we didn't get those roles.
Yeah, exactly.
But it had this the Black men looking, they're eating chicken and they're just looking like they're violent and they're, And there was one scene of a white woman sitting. She was just enjoying the lovely sunshine of the day, frolicking in the breeze, just doing her thing. And out comes this Black man from the bush. Again, white man in blackface. And he's coming towards her. And she, those films. And then there's a cliff in front of her. And she runs toward this cliff and off she goes to her own demise. And this is touted as a piece of history. And the commentary was that this particular scene says that she would have rather jumped over to her own demise than to be raped by a Black man. So these are the challenges that go through, these subliminal messages that go through, that perpetuate our men a certain way. How does that kind of sit with you?
Well, it's I wonder. It's quite shocking for a start. So it's quite and of course the other thing I'm finding interesting is the assumption that this black man was going to rape her.
It was
That's the other
that.
thing.
Yeah.
And I'm left thinking, and I do think this stuff is terribly important, though, and it's centuries old, centuries.
Yeah. Yes.
So there was a person in I think it's the 16th century. He was a Swedish doctor, I think his name will come back to me, where he did these classifications of how people are of different color and they behave differently. And they, so a black person has a black skin, has big lips, and is withdrawn and aggressive, and and so it does all these different descriptions, and these descriptions don't come from nowhere. Where on earth did he sort of find that? He also talked about yellow people, and red-faced people.
Oh, the classification of races. I wonder if it was Carl von Linnaeus.
No, this was prior. Yeah, sorry.
Carl von Linnaeus, was that him?
Yeah.
Okay.
But actually, this was. I'm just thinking. It was just after the description of the different black and white races.
Okay.
But I think the part of the problem with that is that these classifications stay with us,
yes.
And it's very, very hard to shake them off, actually.
Oh my goodness, is it ever?
Yeah.
Right? And if we, and I love that you said that, because if we are honest about it, it is hard to shake it off, especially we're still talking in black and white, and I'm brown. So it's sort of this idea that, you're marrying something black and white, the story I just give you, the black hand on the white hand, there's this, and I recognize that person that was in my life when I told you about that story. They had this passed on to them. So, when we one thing we tout in double consciousness trainings is it's not your fault, but you can do something about it.
Okay.
We can do something about it. And I was going to ask you another thing, Fenella. When you think, because there's another lady that was in the capsule with us, she'll be coming on the show in March, Sheila. And one of the questions I really wanted to ask was, when you are doing because, I'm always thinking, I'm like you, I'm feeling, you get fed up of all the collectives and all of the talk. I'm always interested now in when white people talk about being an ally. That's another thing we should unpack. I know you have maybe a little challenge with that too, but another, when they speak about being allies, and people are definitely doing this work. There's people out here that we've always had people by our sides that are white and just pushing and helping and really genuinely doing this work. Where was I? And then when you think about, I was going somewhere with this. I do this sometimes. What was I talking about?
I guess one of the, while you're recalling that.
Yes.
One of the things I think is important, just in terms of me, is that I've also got my biases, and as a white person, certainly one of the, it's that moment of, I remember particularly on the underground, if somebody's sitting just near you, very close to you, and your purse is visible, it's quite, I have noticed in myself, if it's a young black guy, I immediately think I must get away because I've assumed he's going to nick my purse.
Yes.
And it's, but what's I think hugely important is to spend time noticing those things happening in you, those biases.
Wonderful. Yes.
And
absolutely.
They happened less, but of course they will never stop happening, because that's kind of systemic racism that's in us. But I suppose at the very least, if we're noticing it,
I think
that's number
amazing.
one.
That's
but
amazing.
There's quite a long journey after that.
For sure. But honestly, Fenella, I think besides that, my friend, when I was telling you what she said, that her mother would just die if she married a black man, that was very candid. That's why I want her on the show, because I think some people, even my sister girls, they feel like, they have to defend. No, let's just be straight with me about it. because I felt the same way. I remembered a friend of mine, we went to Dairy Queen. I'm sorry, I don't want to plug Dairy Queen, but do you know Dairy Queen? That's a place where you get some ice cream, right?
Oh, yeah.
So anyway, we were outside here in Toronto. We went someplace, we went to get something to my girlfriend wanted some. And she, a black lady, sister girl. So we ended up, and when we got out of the car, it was dark, and it was not a place I might end up at midnight or whenever we went. And I got out of the car and I saw these black gentlemen with hoodies. And I went to her, oh, what are they doing? What are they doing there? And she said to me, what do you think they're doing? They're getting ice cream. So I said, I don't know. They look like they're going to case the joint, Yeah. And so she says to me, oh, I can't stand you, girl. I can't stand you. Why are you like that? Because I'm well assimilated, okay? Assimilated. So I thought for sure they're going to rob the place. Yeah. So I walk in, and were they there to rob the place? Of course they were there. No, Fenella. They were not there to rob the place. They were there to get ice cream.
Ice cream.
So
that is great.
I came out and she's giving me dirty looks like, that's what we do. We choops. So when I really got a hold of myself as who I was, when I woke, I recognized that story and I realized, oh my goodness, the same way you felt that way is the same way I would feel that way. Why? Because we were assimilated by massa to think and act that way. Both of us. So that's the same thing. So we're going to think I'm assimilated to be like you. It's like when I told my sister girls, I woke up and whoa, this is happening. And they were like, oh, come on. What's that all about anyway? We're good. But my response was, we're good as much as I am like you. Right. But when I start to say, hey, I want you to see color, because then maybe you'll get to my nation and who I am and what we are. How beautiful we are, what the intent was and purpose that we're on this planet. So I love that. I really loved our conversation. I love this conversation because it's one of the two. I've had two. It's yourself and the other lady that have been honest about the fact that, those things, because we've been taught to think this way. Yeah. I've been taught to think it against my own people. You're taught to think it about my group. Yeah. Indigenous is the same. It's interesting how we think. We see someone drunk on the street, an Indigenous person, and we think, look at them. We're thinking all sorts of things, The show I was on, the lady said when she sees people that are homeless and begging on the street, she just tries not to look at it. I'm laughing because it's her show and she was not putting on any ears. So it just hit me as such a genuine response. She's not proud of it, but oh my goodness, we didn't even talk about the coaching, but we're definitely going to have you back. But I was going to say, this is what I was going to say. There's two major things for me. And I think when I understand allyship and people that are doing this work, it's, there's a lot of people out here doing amazing things. And I see them speaking. They've got books they're selling. I am one to caution people on where they put their black dollars. And because to me, people wonder, what should we do? What should we do? Start with putting your black dollars where they should go. So there's certain things I'll say to my people. If you can buy a book written by a black author, right? Buy it. These are practical, tangible things that you can do. We're still a few percent at the top high in terms of wealth. So make no mistake, that's going to take 290 something years and the world would have to freeze for us to catch up. So, and that's not going to happen. So I'm concerned about where I do that. So that's a doing. So my concern is when I see people, white people on a platform or white people having opportunities is wonderful, but systemic and structurally that privilege was afforded you. So what are you doing? I remember, and a friend of mine said, well, I'm going to be on this platform and I'm going to make a way. If there's somebody I could be doing it with that is of your group or Indigenous or whatever that looks like, I need to bring those people in. Yeah. So I think as I ask you that, what are you doing in terms of the doing at this point? So
there's a couple, one of the things, just like you said, is I'm reading out avidly, in and encouraging other people, because that's a really good way to start not to start, but just to keep it live. So one of the things I've done is read quite a lot of biographies or autobiographies by Black people,
Okay.
and particularly in this country, and also in the States. And the other thing is novels. So I don't know if have you read a book called The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett? And
No.
that only came out. It's fantastic. It's about twins.
I'll
Now
write it down.
this fits with the other one story. It's about twins who they were identical twins, and they were both born and brought up in a town that had predominantly Black people in it. And they themselves, their skin color was very pale, and one of them passed as white, and the other one didn't. One of the fascinating things about reading this book is, as you read your way through it, I found myself thinking, oh, well, one of them's skin color is darker than the other one. And actually, I heard Britt Bennett interviewed, and she said, no, they were both had exactly the same skin color. So I read into it color. And do you get what I'm saying? Is that through the narrative, the person turned Black.
Really?
Yeah, it's very clever. But they weren't. They were identical twins. One part. What happened was she went into a shop, and everyone thought she was white, and she started thinking, actually, this is quite good, because you can start getting things as a white person that I couldn't get as a Black person. So it's a very fascinating story to read.
So was it an issue about the complexion was lighter?
No, the complexion was exactly the same. Okay. But in terms of the kind of life that the one of the twins that lived a life with Black people, hung out with Black families, hung out with Black friends. The other one passed as white, married a white guy, lived entirely in a white neighborhood.
That's fascinating.
And you know what happened to them, and there was enormous discomfort. It's quite a complex and many-leveled story. But
was it because the other person was so assimilated? They married white. They integrated into a white community. That's interesting.
Yes, they integrated into a white community, and the reader starts to imagine that they're completely white, although various things happen that brings you back to, well, actually she isn't, and some Black people moved into the neighborhood, and in fact she led a whole protest about not wanting to have Black people in the neighborhood.
Wow. And you're aware that the person is Black when you're reading it?
Well, what I was pointing out was that your awareness fades.
I think that's amazing.
And you start fading with the passing. It was so cleverly written.
Love it.
It's fantastic.
Anyway. It's so interesting. No, Fenella, next time we're probably going to unpack that. But let me tell you something, because I married a white Scottish gentleman. We're not together now. But one of the things that he would say sometimes was, oh, you're not like them. She's not like them. I've heard him say it to other people. And not intentionally meaning harm. But what I really delved into and looked at in the way he was treating me was that you're not Black like them. You're really kind of closer to us in your assimilation.
And you're actually quite white.
Yes, yeah. And granted, that's true. Listen, my granddaddy's Scottish, so I own that part. I own that part too. Come on. So that's a part of me. Yeah. But the reality is that you're saying that, no, you're not like them. The way they behave, you're so cultured. Like, what does that look like? So these are things, I love that. I've got to get my hands on that. The vanishing heart?
The vanishing half.
Vanishing half. That makes sense.
Half of, these siblings, they were identical
wonderful
twins.
Story. I need to get my hands on that. And next time we're going to talk about, what white people can do next. I've got to have you back, because this is good, because we didn't cover any of that. Well, we covered a little bit, but we needed to get into some of that coaching stuff and different things.
And I'd love to talk to you about the coaching, because that's really complex.
Wow. Yeah, it sounds it. And I think we're going to book you back on, because so many people are coaching And people think they can coach everybody and anybody. And I think that your take on that would be huge. And I don't know if you can nutshell that the fact that should people coach everybody, if you can give us a little bit about that, I would appreciate it before we close off.
I guess my feeling is that you know, if you're not cognizant of the differences and you haven't found ways to negotiate that. Because the big thing about any coaching is, how do you manage the contract at the beginning? How do you negotiate that? And actually, you have to be really careful, because it's a super sensitive issue. But you can't get it on the table unless you're open about it. I won't. So if people haven't done their work, no, I don't think they should.
Amazing. Fenella, where, like, do you do workshops? Because you should.
Yeah. Yes.
So
yeah,
where so can people get in touch with you if somebody wanted to find you right now? How would they do that?
Well, so my company is Fenella Trevillion Associates, but curiously, if you just Google Fenella Trevillion, there's no other one. I haven't met another Fenella Trevillion.
Oh, this is
you'd
good.
Get there straight away, and you'd find my website. So,
really?
Yeah.
Okay. And so can people literally, if they do Fenella Trevillion, can they actually book for you to have a time with you?
Yes.
Or
what they would find is get onto the website, and then they can contact me through the website.
Really?
Yeah.
Fabulous.
And anyway, so, and as I said, have developed some training with various other people too. So, and we're beginning to think about how to roll that out. So the latest one was a pilot, and then thinking about how to roll it out. So
you have been amazing, and I love this conversation, and I want more and more. Where am I going to find more Fenellas? So we're going to have to have you.
There are many more out there. Don't you worry.
Yes. Well, we are going to be right back in a moment. Okay. It was great having this time with you guys.
All right. Really great to meet you. And
hi there, I'm Sandra McKechnie from Double Consciousness. Double Consciousness looks like this: cultural sensitivity, cultural awareness trainings. I've been doing it for 4 years. We're going into our 5th year, our 41st time on Zoom, and we're doing it. Would love you to join us. The next thing that I do is I'm a certified life coach, holding space for clients in the areas of cultural awareness and sensitivity, right? So people that may have a challenge and they just want some space, a consultation, coaching opportunity to unpack implicit racial bias. Everybody's welcome, and we would love to have you in the trainings or book a consultation. And we have a free opportunity, 15 minutes, if you want to have a chat and get to know me and find out where you fit in that. The next thing that I do is I am a host for Voices of Humanity out of prconnectionsradio.com. If you want to be on my podcast and you're a fit, because it does have to fit with the show, has to complement the show and the network, I would love you to get in touch with me. And I'm also, from my heart, and I've always been a singer-songwriter, and I love this stuff. I love the singing. We put it in our trainings, our cultural sensitivity and awareness trainings. So sometimes I just sing just like this. You're all that I want. You are all that I need. And you brought me here when I can't find my way. You're all that I need. And you brought me here to pray. You should hear that with my keyboard player. It's to live for. Thank you so much for your time. I hope that helps you to know who Sandra McKechnie is. Take care. Bye for now.
I just like her.
Great.
Oh, this was fun, Fenella. It wasn't fun. I love it. It was informative, and I know that people got something out of it. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to be connecting about a couple of other things, and about you coming back. It's good to book it now.
I've really enjoyed it. I've really enjoyed being with you, and your questions and your enthusiasm. It's great.
Thank you so
Love
much.
It.
To our viewers, thank you for being here. And I know you got something wonderful out of that. It was a great time. Thank you for spending the time. I'm Sandra McKechnie at prconnectionsradio.com, the voice of new media, fueled by double consciousness. This is Black History Month. We have coming up. We have a lot coming up for you in February. And if you want to get in touch with me, doubleconsciousness@gmail.com. And that's 2 B's, okay? doubleconsciousness@gmail.com. Thank you for joining us at Voices of Humanity. Have a wonderful day. Bye for now.